Hi, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everybody here. Hopefully not good night. This is Dr. Sai Harnath. I'm a lung and critical care doctor from Apollo Hospitals. We are here to spend 2 hours discussing, conversing, listening to questions and insights from world experts on remote care, artificial intelligence, and how can the two of these areas be merged to transform care and fill the gaps that are very evident in healthcare around the world today. We have with us experts in artificial intelligence from MIT, Australia, from Monash University. We have practicing leaders from the United States, Dr. Lynn Simon, Ms. Monique, Dr. Neil Patel, who are all from esteemed institutions who are practicing methods and ways to really solve these problems. Today's talks will be anchored by myself, Dr. Sujoy, as well as Dr. Alan Portela, who's from San Diego, who's helping us in our journey towards transforming care using information technology, very specifically in the remote care space. What I will be doing today is to try to moderate a discussion and allow the audience to try to pick in your questions. You can put them into LinkedIn as well as other channels that are open. Our moderators will be sending these questions to us, and we will try to have a discussion through the course of the event, and hopefully there will be enough time to discuss these towards the end. Professor Ganapathy, who's also on screen, is our leader in telemedicine in India. We call him the father of telemedicine, and he has been helping us in many ways in terms of this journey of allowing care to be delivered anywhere in the world as well as anywhere in India. What we will do today is to have some presentations, but mostly discussion. And without much further ado, and praying to the gods of technology to make sure this presentation goes through and bandwidth is great for everybody and there's no lag, we will begin. And I will request my colleague, Dr. Sujoy Kar, who is an artificial intelligence expert, a physician by himself, and who will be introducing our first speaker, Dr. Bertsimas. It'll be really good for me to bring in one mentor as well as inspirational force for all of us, Sangeeta Reddy. She'll be joining us later today. She's the Joint Managing Director of Apollo Hospitals. She's been the pioneer in many areas, including telehealth, and she's going to guide and share her insights towards the end of this presentation. So right now, what we're going to do is to jump into it, Sujoy. I know some of you this is prime time. I don't think there's a big cricket match going on anywhere right now. The big one happened yesterday. But in terms of, I don't know, it's baseball. It's too early in the morning for baseball. So I think what we'll be doing right now is to go ahead and begin, and there'll be enough time to have further discussions among our group itself. So Sujoy, take over, please, and let's hear from you about our esteemed speakers about artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sai. What a pleasure to have in the room such illustrious speakers, people who have worked. And if you combine their years of experience, it runs more than 200 years. So with that statistics, I'll just start, talking about the AI journey that we have been taking at Apollo Hospitals with our partners, with our mentors across the globe. And we have 2 of them here today to actually guide us or handhold us throughout this journey. At Apollo, the data journey began about, say, 15, 16 years back, but we have been also collecting some of the practices that we have been doing in long before that, with the purpose to actually empower our patients, support our clinicians, optimize our healthcare operations, which you will hear more from Professor Bertsimas in a while, and augmenting the needs of the community, which is a very, very important theme in whatever we do. And also, in doing so, today we have about close to 25 AI projects that we run at Apollo Hospitals, out of which about close to 12 of them are in production and being used on a daily basis at Apollo Hospitals, which gives us the opportunity not only to integrate them within Apollo Hospital system, but also to go outside Apollo across the world and cross-validate them and also use them prospectively. Without much ado, I will now hand over to one of my favorite persons in digital health, professor of practice in Monash University, Professor Chris Bain. What a pleasure. He has agreed to join us even at very late hours for him. And I will open today's discussion and presentation by inviting beloved Professor Chris Bain. All yours, sir.
Thanks very much, Sujoy. Pleasure to be with you. Just bear with me as I share my screen with you all. Hopefully you can all see that okay. Everyone seeing that all right?
Looks good, Professor.
Thank you. I had the challenge of talking to you for 10 minutes and trying to cram a lot of hopefully valuable information in for you, but also hopefully open the eyes of some of the audience and some of what's already going on around the world in this space. Just briefly, my background's in medicine and IT, most of it in the health industry, and I've come to the university in the last 5 or 6 years. And I work with our faculty out of our faculty of IT with many partners, including with Apollo, which has been an exciting thing to start doing. I'm very briefly just going to talk about what I mean when I talk about digital health. And what I mean when I talk about digital health is the use of digital tools and interventions in wellness and healthcare. So it's really an applied thing, but obviously in the university we educate about it and we study it. For the purpose of today's talk, I'm going to skip over the impacts of AI in radiology and pathology, which are enormous, but focus more on clinical pointy end of AI in healthcare. And when I talk about that really simple definition of digital health, I always state with it these 6 hallmarks, and I won't have time to expand on all of those, but you'll note that one of those is augmented intelligence, which is delivered by, yes, AI, but it can be delivered by other technologies as well. The idea being to augment the capability of clinicians or patients or carers through these technologies. And the more of those 6 hallmarks one sees, the more likely we're talking about a cutting-edge sort of digital health solution. I'm going to show you some examples from all around the world. This is an example from Australia. This is a product called ResApp, and you see a little bit over the screen. It's got the Australian equivalent of FDA approval, the TGA approval. And basically what this product does is analyse the sound of somebody's cough. So they cough into the microphone of the with some information like fever and other symptoms and also the age group of the patient, allows an automated analysis of what kind of condition the patient has. So is it croup? Is it pneumonia? Is it asthma? Or is it something like COVID, for instance? Obviously, clinical evidence exists around this, but I'm not going to have really time to go into that with you tonight. But just to show you one example of common respiratory illnesses that can be analysed using AI. This product should be very well known to many of you, but I'm still surprised how many people, certainly in my country, have not heard of it. So this is the Cardia product by LiveCore, and you're actually seeing an older version of that product, which basically, by touching those little postage stamp sized devices and hitting the record button, you can record a single lead ECG using that product. Now, I always talk about this product because many people still haven't heard of it, but they had their first FDA approval nearly 10 years ago. It's been around an awfully long time. They have tens of millions of ECGs now, so accordingly they can also analyse those ECGs and have produced AI systems to automatically diagnose arrhythmias, for example. So this is an example in the paper mentioned on the right there where this system, when used prospectively, was 4 times better at picking up AF than just waiting and watching and seeing what happens. The astute amongst you will then ask yourself the question, what does that mean? And you're quite right to ask that. What we do in AF screening is a separate issue, but just to illustrate the potential power of this system, a 6-lead version now exists of this system. And you'll find almost certainly if you wanted to buy it from wherever you are in the world, you could go online and buy this system, which is another interesting question for the uptake of clinical AI. This is another paper about this system, this time in children. So looking at children presenting to an emergency department with palpitations, and they compared the use of this system in such children with traditional Holter monitoring and found it was 4 times better at arriving at a diagnosis, and it was much preferred by the patients and families compared to a traditional Holter monitor. There's probably more than 100 papers around now about Cardia. So the product works. we're in this phase of showing all the ways it can help in the healthcare system. There's been a number of papers in this space. There may even be some commercial product, but this is one of the first I saw in the area of colonoscopy. And many of you will know that colonoscopy is basically a video of the inside of the colon taken by usually a trained clinician. And this system was trained on these videos to automatically detect polyps and adenomas. And there's a problem in current practice where, despite best training, there's a variability in how well doctors can pick up these growths in the colon, which can be a precursor of cancer. And that variability is measured by a thing called adenoma detection rate, ADR. So in this study, these people not only built the system by training it up, but then prospectively tested it against non-AI supported clinicians and found that they were able to increase the adenoma detection rate by 50%. So finding many more lumps and bumps, if you like. In many cases, these were too small to be picked up by the human operator, but they also found where there were obvious cancerous looking growths, they were easily picked up as well. So this really opens that idea of augmentation. How can we improve the performance of clinicians? How can we maybe support less well-trained clinicians, because we have a health workforce shortage, by the use of such systems? There are follow-on questions. What does that mean for the patient? But it's just to show that this kind of stuff is around and is right on our doorstep and is used in some parts of the world. I'm going to briefly talk about an external paradigm which is separate of AI, but I think is very relevant to thinking about AI in clinical care and about AI and how it might transform hospital care. And that's called the smart on fire paradigm. I won't talk in great detail about it, but those people who work in this area will be well aware of it. And think of it as a way to bring highly specialised functionality into electronic medical record systems. So these electronic medical record systems work off standardisation, as do all large IT systems. But we know that medicine and healthcare gets increasingly subspecialised every day. So those two forces fight against each other. This paradigm allows the developers of products to have them brought into the electronic medical record framework so that those systems can be tailored to special jobs. So an orthopaedic surgeon's job is very different to a psychiatrist's job, is very different to a cardiologist's job. Yet often they're expected to work off the same electronic medical record systems. This particular application is called Insight, and you get a sense of it from the picture here. It uses AI, and what it does is allows a picture of a wound to be analysed by AI, which is done separately to the medical record system, but the result delivered back into either a phone or into the medical record system in the form of an augmented reality display of the level of healing of the wound, so that you can get an objective sense of healing over time, rather than the sort of thing I used to do in the 1990s, and that is draw diagrams by hand of how somebody's wound might or might not be healing. This is also using this external app model, but it's quite a different thing. This was originally an Australian product called DoseMe. It's since been bought up by a US company, and it's in the space of really complicated prescribing problems. So think about drugs that are toxic but also need measures, say, of renal function, but also need to be delivered within tight therapeutic ranges. Think of warfarin, think of aminoglycoside antibiotics, think of some anti-epileptics. And this particular system uses a kind of AI called Bayesian intelligence. And what it allows then is much more intelligent prescribing and precise prescribing decisions to be made by clinicians with the support of this system. This system supports over 40 different drug models now. Here's a little study looking at its use in vancomycin dosing. So most of you on the call, I hope, will be familiar with the fact that vancomycin is a toxic antibiotic. The level in the blood is quite important to get right, both to have effect, but not to cause damage like kidney damage by having the dose wrong. In this particular study, They did it in a particular ward where vancomycin is used on vascular surgery patients, so people having peripheral vascular disease treated, FEMPOP bypasses and so forth. And the outcomes they were looking at was really the efficacy of the drug, the accuracy of the drug in the blood, so mean AUC in 24 hours, and also the percentage of time in acceptable range for the drug, whilst also not causing bad effects. So secondary clinical outcomes like acute kidney injury. And you can see on the right there that using this supportive system, the DoseMe system, to make these prescribing decisions led to much better mean AUC values. That was a 50% improvement, and also a doubling of mean therapeutic time in range without causing any adverse clinical effects. So the take-home message is the AI-supported prescribing system really helped those prescribing and delivering the drugs to do a better job, is the take-home message. Skipping now to diabetes, and there's plenty of products in digital health and in digital therapeutics that help with diabetes. This particular one is called DNAV, and in this particular study, it's trying to optimize insulin management in patients with type 2 diabetes, published in The Lancet. Couple of hundred patients, or 90 in each arm, intervention and control, and trying to improve the HbA1c for the diabetic patients, so the measure of long-term control of their diabetes. And you can see that when they use this DNAV AI-enabled system, they did nearly 3 times better in reducing that HbA1c in the intervention group compared to the control group, without having any adverse effect on hypoglycemic events. So again, quite a successful little study. This is an interesting study more in the research realm. This is using the MIMIC database in the United States, which is a very well-known intensive care unit medical record database across multiple systems. And this was looking at the problem of sepsis. So in sepsis, severe overwhelming infection, there is a critical problem in particular with patients' blood pressure, and trying to keep the patient's blood pressure at a safe level, not allow it to drop too low, is really a key outcome we're trying to achieve in sepsis treatment. And there's 2 ways we do that. One is by giving fluid, and the other is by giving drugs that deliberately raise the blood pressure, but they can have bad effects as well. They're called inotropes. And in this particular system, researchers analysed historic sepsis data and looked at the patterns of treatment of patients, this balance of fluids versus inotrope drugs, and made a model from it, and then did some prospective validation or separated validation against other patients in the database. And interestingly found that this system recommended using the drugs a lot more than the historic pattern of fluids. And then when they looked at what actually happened in the real world, and the end goal being here patient survival at 90 days, they found that those patients who were treated in a way more consistent with the system's recommendation did better than those who were treated in other ways. So this is a really interesting AI study because it gets away from a lot of what AI in radiology is, for instance, which is pattern recognition, saying this is a pattern of cancer or this is a pattern of infection, and gets into the space of complicated judgment-based decision-making, which we think is going to be really important going forward. Comes back to that point of augmentation of the capability of the clinician. Can we make it easier for them to do their jobs? Can we make it easier for more junior staff to take on more responsibility with support from AI? So I hope I've kept relatively well to my time there.
Yes.
I've really tried to skip around the world and also give you a sense of a diverse range of clinical situations relevant to hospitals where AI can make a big difference.
Thank you, Professor Bain. I completely understand it's very late in the day. Now I have a complete privilege to introduce respected Professor Dimitris Bersimas, who is the distinguished Boeing professor.
I'm going to interrupt really quick. Is Professor Bain going to stay with us for the question answer? Do we need coffee supplied from here?
Dr. Sai, yes, he will be there for.
He will be. All right. So I know you're going to be a little late, sir. So kindly hang on with us. It'd be lovely if you can stay for the whole program.
Yeah.
So should I go back, please?
You're right. Thank you, Dr. Sai. It's a complete pleasure to introduce Professor Dimitris Bersimas, who is the distinguished Boeing professor at MIT Sloan. Professor Dimitris Bersimas runs the world's best operational research at MIT Sloan. He has been associated with MIT for past 35 years, more than 250 published papers. And if I go on talking about his CV, this will possibly be longer than his presentation. With that, sir, all yours.
Thank you very much, Sujoy. Let me share my screen for a minute. It's also my pleasure to acknowledge the 40 years of Apollo Hospitals. I understand this year marks 40 years of a very distinguished service. I'm actually participating from India in the Apollo Hospitals, and I have already been very impressed. I have, prior to coming, with the wide impact that the Apollo Hospitals have, but when you see it in person, is yet another perception. So congratulations for the first 40 years, and I'm looking forward. I won't be around for all of them for the next 60 to make it 100 and then beyond. So what I chose to talk today is on transforming clinical practice, the growing role of artificial intelligence. And, I like talking with examples as opposed to generalities. So I selected two and then talk about some research that my group at MIT has been doing that might be potentially helpful. A case study at Hartford Healthcare Systems where we actually utilized AI to improve outcome for patients, but also the length of stay and improving, as I mentioned, outcomes. And a similar study that we have been doing with my colleagues at Apollo Hospitals, Sujoy and his group, in Hyderabad, where I am at the moment. I would also like to talk about, in my opinion, biased opinion, of course, a new area that I call holistic AI for medicine, and talk about the future. So Hartford Hospital System is a large, high-quality healthcare system in the United States, in the state of Connecticut. It's the largest system there. It has revenues of the order of $5 billion, about 2,500 beds, over 7 hospitals. The largest of these hospitals, the Hartford Hospital in the city of Hartford, has about 850 beds. So we have been working with them for a long time, and I believe Hartford Hospital System is representative of a typical US hospital network system. So we have actually implemented a solution method. Today I'm going to talk about, it has multiple components. Today I'm going to talk about the length of stay component, but in addition, we have scheduling of the ED system, of the nurses, block optimization for operating rooms and so forth. But today, as I mentioned, I'll talk about the length of stay and mortality characterizations. So what is the problem we're addressing? We have, the hospital has electronic medical records from every patient in the hospital. And what we would like to do, we would like to use AI to predict on a daily basis, predict how likely it is that the patient will be discharged 24 hours from now or 48 hours from now, to also understand the mortality risk probability in a way that calculates what's called a deterioration index, and also understand the likelihood of the final destination, which could be somebody's home or a rehabilitation center or a more elaborate rehabilitation center. And then the ICU risk, what's the probability that the patient would require an ICU bed, or if the person is in ICU, what's the probability of getting out of the ICU? There are many significant questions that can be helped from this analysis. Let me only talk about discharge. So the length of stay at Hartford Hospital System is about 5.7 days. And we have, after implementing it for the last year and a half, we have observed that when we implemented, in the units that we implemented, the length of stay becomes roughly from 5.7 to 5 days, 0.7 days, which for those of you that have experience with the healthcare system in the United States, this has significant financial benefits in the tens of millions category for a hospital the size of Hartford healthcare system. So I would not bore you with numbers, but just to tell you that we've built machine learning models that across the board, there are 7 hospitals, there are therefore 7 columns. Across the board, the area under the curve, the AUC, so to speak, is quite strong and quite common along the various hospitals. So it took us quite a bit of time to develop that. And the models are also reasonably calibrated. Calibration is a topic of significance. So what it says, this is what the model predicts the probability of, let's say, discharge in 48 hours, as an example, would be. In reality, the ideal calibration is a 45-degree angle, which means the model is very well calibrated. And similarly for mortality calculations. That's relevant because you would like the assurance that if the model predicts a probability, that the probability is reasonably accurate. We also built a system, this is related to the topic of the talk. So on a daily basis, data is loaded in the system. Our algorithms run, and this is the output of our system, in which the rows are the patients. Then you see the various probabilities, for example, the probability of mortality, the probability of that was present yesterday regarding mortality, the discharge within 1 day, 2 days, and so forth. And we have a color scheme in which red means the probability of mortality, risk, in other words, the probability of mortality is either high or has increased a lot from at least 10% from the day before. Green is the probability that is above a certain threshold, as well as the probability improved sizably from the day before. And the doctors use this schema to prioritize patients for discharge. So, for example, when you sort by the probability of discharge in the next 24 hours, for example, you see patients that are ready to go. So you can start the process of administrative processes to accelerate discharge. Oftentimes, maybe clinically the person is ready, but if the system is not ready, you might stay an extra day, sometimes 2. So the system takes all this data, on the background, calculates using artificial intelligence, probabilities of discharge, mortality, and so forth, and informs the hospitalist who take care of the patients, the administration or the nurses who take care of these patients, of how to prioritize in the case of discharge. In the case of mortality, it basically keeps the system alert of that the person needs extra attention. It also has some interesting interpretability characteristics. You don't see it in the screen, but you see, for example, why a particular patient, if you click, for example, on the probability, you see the reasons the system believes the person is ready to be discharged in ways that are reasonably understandable to physicians and nurses. So in terms of impact of this work, so we started in 2021, and at the time, the black line are units that did not, to that day until 2023, have not used it. This is to do an appropriate ABT test. And these are units that start using it. And we started initially there and in partial pilot and then a fully pilot in 2022. We have found that the trajectory of length of stay, which, as I mentioned, we extrapolate for the units that had we not used the system, would have been 565 days. It's 585 for the others on average, as I mentioned, 5.7. And for those units, the actual recorded length of stay, it was 498, a reduction of 0.7 days roughly, 0.67. So we also have made analysis, I don't show it here, but that the readmission probabilities have been, in fact, better for those patients that have green as I mentioned, is the indication that the patient is ready to be discharged, which suggests that there's no adverse effect on readmission. In fact, it's a beneficial aspect when it means that the system really finds who are stronger candidates to be discharged. In terms of financial aspects, I don't have time to explain it in detail, but if you have 0.7 days reduction in length of stay, if you have, depending on how busy the hospital is, so if you have new patients, you increase the throughput from 5.7 to 5 means from 73 to 64, from 64 patients when the length of stay is 5.7 to 63, 9 more patients a year if you multiply by the beds and the corresponding amounts of money that typical US hospitals have. You can figure an estimate of the financial benefit of the hospital in the order of 30 to 40 million if you only allow, let's say, 50% of the beds are being backfilled. The most important thing, the numbers are not so important. The fact that this is a reasonably significant number for hospitals that either are in the red or break even in at least in the United States. So this is sort of the case for where we have applied, we have observed it, and so forth. I would like a comment on how, of course, one aspect is good models and performance and so forth. A very important component is how closely we work with the Harvard Healthcare team. So we had weekly meetings. It's not enough, in my experience, to develop an AI model. Humans, physicians and nurses and administrators need to be convinced that this is something relevant. And the way we have done it is that we built first an inner team that gave comments and so forth for some period of time, months. Then we expanded to a team of about 100 people, and then we gave presentations. Then there were advocates of the physicians who used it, became advocates, and suddenly today we have several thousands of people across the system who use it. So it took some time, and this is, I think, in my opinion, an important component. Maybe it can also happen in discussion. I would also like to use the opportunity to tell you a similar study that we have embarked doing with Apollo Hospitals, Sujoy's group, in Hyderabad, where I'm at the moment, the Jubilee Hills Hospital. It's a hospital that has 500 plus beds. And just to let you know, the performance was very similar than before. In other words, that just a second. The performance was very similar as Harvard. It sounds trivial. It wasn't. It was a lot of hard work by both teams. And if you look at the reasons, you look at the contribution of the major factors that contribute to this accuracy. While there is commonality between Harvard and Apollo hospitals, they're actually somewhat different, reflecting on, number one, the patients in these two hospitals are different demographics. One is in Hyderabad, the other is in Hartford, Connecticut. But also, it also reflects the different results, different data that the different hospitals have. Interestingly, there were very similar performance. So it's also well-calibrated models. The mortality needs some desire to be further calibrated on the high end, but generally the calibration of the models is strong. We also build a system that has, in addition to probabilities, has an indication of why a person is going to be discharged or why we believe mortality is what it is. It gives some intuition in understanding. So this was to say, this was an example of the reason I included the Apollo Hospital study, is to demonstrate that the application of a successful application that we had earlier took some effort and some care and serious collaboration across various oceans between Boston, where I am, and Hyderabad, where the India team is. It does so that you need the commitment, good data, and perhaps serious research to do a good job in the new hospital. A final comment that I would like to make is it's something about the future. My group at MIT developed what is called holistic AI for medicine. The acronym is HAIM. HAIM is the Jewish word for life. And it's relatively easy to observe that in medicine, human doctors utilize scans, language, tabular data, potentially time series, to make decisions, predictions, and prescriptions. So it's natural to ask why machines can also use the same. In fact, if you look at the five basic human senses, touch, sight, hearing, and smell and taste, multimodality, the use of multiple types of information, is fundamental characteristic of human life. So it's natural to consider artificial intelligence and machines. So this is from a paper that appeared in Nature Digital Medicine about a year ago from my group. We utilize the mimic data sets. I'll be very brief just to give you a sense of what we are doing. So we have developed an architecture for trying to target mortality, 10 diagnoses that are related to because to upper respiratory type diseases and length of stay as well, but now using multiple modalities. The modalities we used is images, radiology reports, and tabular data. And we develop a flexible architecture in which, using deep learning, we utilize every modality, and we can add other modalities to predict, but we never use the prediction to predict outcomes, but we utilize the embedding that exists in the final version of the deep learning just before making the prediction, translating images to numbers. The deep learning's capability of transforming unstructured data like language or images to numbers it's very powerful characteristic. We don't understand, we lost interpretability in doing that, but it's very powerful. Once you connect all this data now and numbers, you can make improved predictions. And what we have found that across the board in this 10 diagnoses, mortality and length of stay, very significant improvement. And so you see, for example, that the use of incrementally every single modality adds value. And if you put all of them compared to a baseline of classical AI, namely only structured data, leads to significant improvement. So regarding the future, we have implemented the system to what I presented, the holistic AI, the holistic hospital optimization that I talked with Harvard to 8 hospitals. We are in the process of implementing to other Apollo hospitals. We have introduced HAIM, and we have utilized the prototype of HAIM in multiple applications, from detecting domestic abuse at the Brigham and Women's Hospital to understanding cancer in oncology or cardiovascular diseases, psychiatry, and so forth. It's not that difficult to find applications of multimodal in medicine. And our aspirations is to integrate these two tools, the prediction on length of stay and mortality, as well as the holistic AI in hospitals around the world. And on that, I would like to conclude, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Dr. Sai, do we have time for some discussion, some questions? Yes, 1 or 2 minutes?
Absolutely. So we have actually reasonable amount of time, about 10 minutes at least. And
so I will start with I'll start with a couple of questions.
Right.
I'll start with a couple of questions, Dr. Sai. This is a question specific to Professor Chris Payne. If I were to ask you, which one is the main requirement for AI models, top performance in healthcare setting? What would you pick? What would you choose?
If you ask me to choose one thing, Sujoy, based on some recent experience in our state, it's the governance framework, which might be a surprising answer. So the reason I say that is, the reverse of India, our biggest and best hospitals are in the public system. Our healthcare system is heavily publicly funded. The hospitals in our state get a fair degree of freedom compared to hospitals in some other states of our country. Yet recently our state government, ill-advisedly, in my opinion, made some very bold statements about the use of AI in healthcare, which have really put a dampener on work in the space. They can't really touch the research side and the clinical research side, but they certainly put a large shadow over its practical use. But, looking at that another way, I would imagine in your system in Apollo private hospitals, you perhaps have a fair degree of latitude over how you govern and how you innovate, which, an externally funded public hospital maybe can't. So, yeah, I think there's lots of factors, but that's a big one that can affect it.
Thank you. And Professor Bersimus, we see a lot of performance metrics, particularly to evaluate AI models, but many of them may not be applicable to clinical setting. How do we go about in bridging that gap? How do we make metrics more clinically relevant?
So if I may, so Joy, maybe I share, I have, this is something I actually skipped, but I have some answer to that. So what you see here, so the typical AI methods for judging systems is the area under the curve. You see both myself and Chris introduce them and use them. But in practice, that's not how we select. So typically, let's take for discharge, there are various parameters. And by changing these parameters, you see on the horizontal axis, what's called precision. Given that the patient is green, given in other words that the patient is, the system believes that it's ready to be discharged, and what is the actual probability of discharge given that the patient is green. And on the vertical axis, what says recall, if given that the person is discharged, how likely is it that the person has been green? And we select, so various AUCs have different curves. Our system this is in the Apollo hospitals, is in this range. Namely, we have accuracy of about 82% on given that the person is green, what's the probability of discharge, and for recall, the corresponding. Similarly, for mortality, you can select the parameters in ways that make sense, and humans have a better understanding. I have found that while AUC is a technical, quite useful high-level performance characteristic, I think humans understand better things of this nature, but that tell you, given that the system tells you something, how accurate it is, and given that the person is discharged, or how likely it is that it is green, how much you select. I have found that this is by experience. We have found that utilizing these tools in this way gives better acceptability.
Thank you, Sujoy. I think we are hitting the mark where we need to speed up just a little bit. There's a question from the audience. Salim asks us, would it be useful to know if the models being developed are copyrighted to each system, or can they be shared with other systems? Are there open access models? How would we make it happen? Is there a community kind of working on that? Either Dr. Bain or Dr. Bertsimas, please.
I can take it for a minute. So in our case, each time we have now tried multiple hospital systems, we tailor the models with the data of the system. We don't share data across hospitals. We're not allowed to. So we actually develop, the architecture of the models is similar, but the adaptation on the data and the actual data is different for every hospital. That's how we have developed it so far.
Professor Bain?
Dr. Bain, would you like to say something?
Yeah, look, there are definitely open source initiatives people can tack onto, and there's pros and cons with that, just as there's pros and cons with buying product. But there definitely are open source opportunities, for sure.
I have a very specific question for Dr. Bain. On the vancomycin study, would we be able to get away from measuring levels? Would we be able to stop measuring vanco levels, just knowing certain features? And
it's not the lesson to take away from it. So the principle of the dose-me system is that it feeds, and the advantage of its intimacy with the EMR is it can take the data in the EMR, the latest renal function, the latest blood level, and then does the profiling of what to give next, or when to give next, and how much. It's a few steps down the track before we would get to that level, I would suspect.
I'm going to push a little bit here. What are those steps for us to get to the point where we don't need the level? And the reason I ask is, WANCO levels are, it's one of the major things that are done in US hospitals, other hospital systems where PharmDs are doing it, and not just WANCO, any kind of drug that you measure. And many places don't have that. It's not easy to access. I would guess that all of Africa doesn't have it. Asia, it's very rare to measure WANCO levels, and we don't use the drug because we're afraid it'll cause kidney issues. What are the steps to get to the point where we don't need to measure? What do you think?
So, Dr. Sai, I will answer that for you. And that is where we have to actually do a little bit of work on the ears. It has the empirical antibiotic recommendation system, and we were discussing this with Professor Bersimus in the past 2 days, and he likes it, the way it works.
All right, perfect. So great. So we'll touch base again. Dr. Bain, please feel free to stay on, and I think there'll be a lot of interaction. If any of the other members who are attending would want to ask any questions of the two AI speakers, please go ahead. Dr. Simon, Ms. Brand, Alan, or Neil?
I do have a quick question. One of the things that I think across the country is an issue here is the discontinuation of a telemetry patient. Once a patient is placed on telemetry, it's very difficult for somebody to come back and want to discontinue. I can see the need for AI in this mechanism to look at factors for which would be a safe mechanism to take the patient off of telemetry and then free up the resources for the other patients coming in. I guess my question would be then, do you see a way to be able to do that?
Just because our systems are a little different, Monique, give me an example of the telemetry scenario you're talking about.
Sure. A patient comes to a medical surgical unit from the emergency center with an order for telemetry for a reason and is just simply left on. Nobody wants to discontinue that patient. It feels like a safety net versus, a diagnostic tool. And so
this is even within the inpatient episode.
Exactly.
People are afraid to make the cessation order, if you like.
Exactly.
Look, I put my medical training hat on from the late 80s, and I'd say that's a question of having sound clinical judgment. But I would think there is a role for AI models in that. The question is, what's the size of the problem, and does the investment in effort of AI models justify the outcome? But as Dimitris' work sort of indicated, there can be hidden things that we measure but we may not pay clinical attention to, or there are a multitude of small factors that AI might give us a confidence by analysing that our own brain can't do. So I guess the answer is maybe AI has a role in that. AI can do all sorts of things. The question is, what things should we point it to?
Thank you.
Great.
I'd like to pick up on
transition over.
I am absolutely itching to give one word answer. Absolutely yes.
So,
if I may give a 2-word answer, and that is good evening, everyone. And that is that I think there's an interim step for remote care in the scenario that you stated, and we're going to talk more about it later.
Great. So I'm going to, while I hand off to Professor Ganapathy, again, thank Professor Bertsimus and Professor Bain for wonderful insights into the AI space. And Sujoy, thank you so much for bringing them over. I'm reminded of the UB40 song. I see the people on the audience probably remember that band, the UB40 band, but one of their songs goes, every hour, every day I'm learning more. The more I learn, the less I know about before. And the less I know, the more I want to look around, digging deep for clues on higher ground. So, I've just learned a lot. I did a course with Professor Bertsimus, a short one on AI, and I thought there was some basic foundation, but this is a space that is evolving so rapidly. We really have to keep moving and learning a lot more. There's plenty of other questions in the chat network. What I will do is right after Professor Ganapathy talks, I'll kind of put them together as themes, and then we'll try to get back on those perhaps towards the end also. Professor Ganapathy, all yours. And Professor Ganapathy, as I told earlier, is a doyen for telemedicine in India. He's a neurosurgeon who actually doesn't do neurosurgery anymore, but he just works on mostly telemedicine for a lot of spaces in India and many different aspects. Professor Ganapathy, if you could actually introduce yourself a little bit, because there's way too many things you've done for me to enlist. And you can please tell us about what you see as the linkage between telemetry, telemedicine, and artificial intelligence. Yours.
Thank you, Dr. Harinath. I have actually been asked to bridge what is called the gap between the first session, the use of AI, and the second session, remote healthcare. Now, I belong to the 20th century, trained in the 20th century. I belong to the BC era. I strongly believe that a solution is not a solution, whether it is AI or NI or whatever you call it, unless it is universally available to everyone, every time, everywhere, at a reasonable, cost-effective nature. Now, I would like to give a few examples where we are using AI or starting to use AI in remote healthcare. These are, of course, pilot projects, proof of concept, but just goes to show where India is heading. I often think it is an audacious idea to provide universal health coverage, to even think of providing universal health coverage to 1/6 of the population on this planet. The pilot project is of 500 million people. Obviously, without digital health, this cannot even be thought of. But it is fascinating to see that just a few days ago, the Ayushman Bharat website reported 468 million people have already registered and created what is called an ABA number. And I am very optimistic that in my lifetime, in the next 10 years maximum, we will see 95% of India's population not just using their Aadhaar card, but using their ABHA card. This is because the government is attempting to bridge the disparity between rural and private and government care. Again, it's interesting to see that out of the 108 unicorns in India, in this year alone, 6 are from the field of digital health. And again, India is number 4 in the whole world regarding funding for startups with more than $50 million. At least 10% of these startups directly do with digital health. I'm just going to spend a minute showing you how we, the Apollo Hospital Group, Apollo Telemedicine Foundation, in a World Economic Forum project, which we started 8 months ago. In fact, yesterday we had a review meeting and I was told that 27,000 people have been screened for 5 different cancers in one of the mountainous and most desolate areas in Meghalaya, a very small state in northeastern India. We are using smart AI-powered handheld devices for screening on the ground. Of course, we use state-of-the-art technology, quality management systems, and these patients, believe it or not, are instantaneously through the internet, through a telemedicine network, connected to a medical oncologist, a surgical oncologist, and so on and so forth. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, and I think this is all over the world, not confined to India, is that we need a behavioral modification. While the speakers from Monash University and Boston MIT were absolutely amazing with their knowledge of technical details, it is very, very difficult to convince a person, particularly in a remote area, that something called AI can be used. So this is what is happening. Another project which we are going to start next month, which I'm very excited about, is a handheld chest X-ray. 40 years ago, I would never have even dreamt of this. Even a few years ago, I would not have thought that India would reach the stage where a 3.5 kilogram can be put inside a backpack, as you see in this picture. We go to the remotest part of the country, wherever we want, battery operated. We do not depend on power, solar power generated, so on and so forth. Once we do the screening and we have a suspicious area, of course, we are also going to use AI to supplement our very experienced radiologists from interpreting a doubtful shadow on the chest X-ray. Once we screen this, believe it or not, we are going to use a World Health Organization endorsed product, sputum testing via TrueNat. TrueNat is a 100% Indian company from Pune, which has tested this and it has come up with a 100% sensitivity and specificity to extract DNA from the Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And believe me, this can be done again with a battery-operated device. It takes 60 minutes to give a printed report. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is where India is with regard to use of AI in healthcare. I cannot help but show just one more example. Again, I belong to the generation where we used to take a swab, send it for culture sensitivity, and I understand this is still practiced even in the big cities of India. Wait for 48 hours. We already, Dr. Sujoy has been talking about antimicrobial resistance, the use of AI, etc. But this is going to be clinically tested now. That a very, very young group have devised this. They just use a light source using ultraviolet, visible, infrared, near-infrared spectroscopy and capturing multispectral images within 60 seconds. The AI algorithm gives comprehensive information about wound infection, tissue oxygenation, wound dimensions in less than 300 seconds. The entire duration of imaging is 1 minute. We have now approved the further funding for the clinical trials, and believe me, the preliminary trials even indicate they are able to distinguish the multispectral analysis, whether it is gram-positive, gram-negative, streptococcus, staphylococcus, and so on. And most of us are convinced that in the next 2-3 years, this is going to be a totally made in India for the world at 5 to 10% of the cost now available in Western countries. I could go on and on, but I know that time is a major constraint. And I personally am delighted that the biggest engineering institutions in India, namely the IITs, all the first 5 IITs today have understood that medical science and technology probably is as important, if not more important, than chemical engineering or metallurgy or computer science. Bringing engineering to life, that is the motto of IIT Madras. And again, it's a matter of great pride that I have been associated with Apollo Hospital since its inception. And it is wonderful to see that though designated as a corporate hospital, we are very closely working with most of the IITs doing projects where we are going to clinically test. So this is what it is. And my final take-home message would be never stop learning, because life never stops teaching. If Moses were to come down to the earth again and talk about the 10 commandments, every single commandment would be prefaced by the sentence, "Thou shalt digitally transform." What matters is how you see yourself. As I mentioned, I belong to the BC era, but I'm absolutely convinced that in the next 5 years, digital health is going to be incorporated into the mainstream of healthcare, not just in rural India, not just in suburban India, but in rural India. A solution for India is a solution for the world, and with collaboration with eminent experts from all over the world, as we have been seeing in the last 1 hour, I think India is the place where AI in healthcare is going to really take off. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Thank you, Harinath, for giving me this opportunity, and thank all the others as well.
Thank you, Dr. Ganapathy. Absolutely fabulous. For those of you who couldn't get enough of Dr. Ganapathy, just Google him. There's plenty of YouTube talks which would keep you up at night. He's an enthralling speaker. So that's really a great overview, Professor Ganapathy. Thank you so much. And I think there's plenty of questions going on, but I'm going to kind of jump through so that we make the transition to telemetry. And then we can kind of go on and see this time for integrating these and do some questions later. Today, by the way, happens to be the first day of the Indian festival of Dussehra. Dussehra commemorates the Indian 10-handed goddess Durga. And when Professor Bain was talking about multimodality, I was just thinking, we're talking about getting information from all these places, and very auspicious start to have this conversation today. So, Alan, would you want to go first? The speakers here are your friends. You've known them for a while. They're all leaders in this space. I'm going to let you introduce them. Alan, by the way, is the ex-CEO of Airstrip. Airstrip, if you don't know, I'm sure you know about it, but they were kind of the leaders in kind of getting the telemetry into the palms of your hands. And when Professor Bertsimas mentioned Hartford Hospital, I'm an alumnus of Hartford Hospital. That was like a long time ago. And it's really nice to hear about the great things they've done. If you remember the Hartford algorithm for measuring the AUCs, it's one of the first algorithms for measuring the ideal drug levels. So wonderful to have all of you here. Great AI section. Thank you, Sujoy, for coordinating this. We transition on. Alan, all yours from San Diego.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And of course, Dr. Sai, it's not fair to put me right after Dr. Ganapathy. It's It was an incredible presentation, but also as he stated, was able to now make the link between the previous topic and now the next topic. First of all, I want to thank Apollo for putting this together and give us the opportunity to talk about these important topics. Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, thank you for bringing me into your team to help as a principal advisor in virtual care. Dr. Sai, Dr. Sujoy, it is incredible to work with you on a daily basis. Also, before I introduce the team members, I want to introduce the topic, remote care, what the industry calls remote patient monitoring today. And mostly this term is used for remote care beyond the hospital walls. And what the objective is when the industry talks about that is to bring hospital level care outside of the walls of the hospital, but really targeting patients like that are acute, semi-acute, and with complex chronic cases. The thing that is really important to describe is that before we try to go into the home to improve remote care or remote patient monitoring, we really have to fix hospital level care. And when you look at hospital level care, it is obvious that COVID exposed a lot of challenges that already existed, but now we are in a very difficult place because we still have limited data interoperability. We can talk about AI, but if we don't have the right level of connected care, we're not going to be able to leverage AI to start bringing risk stratification, disease classification as we look at a patient population. But also, now we're left with deeper levels of clinicians, with clinical staffing shortage, but also the patient acuity has gone up. So now that patient acuity going up creates higher patient volumes. We are in a place that unless we have discussions like this, the system is going to implode. So the topics, and I'm glad, Monique, you asked that question about telemetry discontinuation. I call that telemetry navigation because it really has to be with telemetry initiation, telemetry continuation, and telemetry discontinuation. How do you manage that area? Today, it seems to be that if we want to bring hospital level to the home, it seems that we have to pick one area of the hospital that we want to replicate throughout the enterprise, post-acute care and into the home. And that area today is cardiac telemetry, is the one that is monitored with central monitoring unit. It is the area that has continuous monitoring of biometrics. And then now we're starting to look at the use of AI. So the fact that telemetry is the area that everybody, all the ER patients are admitted, most of them, into the cardiac telemetry unit just to get that level of monitoring, is creating high occupancy levels in that area, which creates also bottlenecks in the ER, and it creates a huge issue downstream and upstream. So today, we carefully put together the top leaders in the industry in the US that are addressing all those three areas. First, I will just give a high-level overview. Monique Brand, she comes from William Beaumont, a medical center healthcare system in Detroit that now is part of the merge with Spectrum Health. Now it's called Corwell. She is the leading expert on central telemetry monitoring units. She's going to tell us what they did to improve the level of care, not just in telemetry, but moving that level of care into the general wards. Then Dr. Neil Patel, another very good friend from Vanderbilt University. He's going to talk about how Vanderbilt is looking at improving the level of care in the emergency department, waiting areas, boarding areas, and then looking at providing the patient traffic flow so not all patients go into telemetry. And finally, Dr. Lynn Simon, the president at Community Health Systems and Chief Health Innovation Officer, she is going to talk about the management of patient population beyond the hospital walls. So this is a perfect group to discuss this topic. So I will pass it to you, Monique, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for allowing me to share our journey. So this is Cornwall Health East CTMU. We call it Centralized Telemetry Monitoring Unit. It is off-site. It is not in a hospital any longer. It is system-wide and it is digital. So I would love to show you the old school picture of the gigantic monitors in the one little closet room that was designated for telemetry back when I first became involved with it. And I can tell you, I may use the word Beaumont, I may use the word Cornwall. I've spent 30 years with the organization, and I knew it as Beaumont for most of those years. So when Beaumont first started its journey into centralized telemetry monitoring, it was way back in the 1900s. So we started in 1991 with a pilot program for telemetry monitoring to see how can we stop ambulance diversions from our hospital? And I'm talking about one of our largest hospitals in our system, which is our Royal Oak. It is now called William Beaumont University Hospital. It's affiliated with a medical school at Oakland University. So when that first started, we built a small department. Again, there was no real estate in a hospital. I think we all know that real estate in a hospital is a premium. There's hardly enough space for offices, let alone trying to create space for something that's going to accommodate so many patients. So it started as a pilot program, 1991, to avoid ambulance diversions. And I think the term, if you build it, they will come, is really how telemetry has worked in most hospitals. If you build it, you find that it really did work. It allowed patients, and in our case, to go to their area of specialty care. And I think we were early adopters of that piece of it, not creating a telemetry unit, but creating all units to have telemetry. And I know that we're not the only ones doing that today, but we may have been, again, early on in that. And I think that that's really been one of our, key reasons for being able to allow patients to go to those specialty areas of care, including, and now one of our newest areas is labor and delivery. We monitor laboring high-risk patients. And I think that's a great thing to be able to do. So a little bit about our hospital. We currently have 8 campuses. We started off with 2, then 3, and so on. We became a system of 8. We've now merged with another system, as Ellen said. Today, we have our standalone system on the east side of Southeast Michigan. And we have, again, 8 acute campuses. We have upwards of almost 600,000 emergency room visits throughout our system. So as he mentioned earlier, many of those patients coming through the emergency center are going to be placed on telemetry. And we needed to be able to have a consistent process across our system. How do you put together or looking at putting together an offsite telemetry system, bringing together 8 sites that have entirely different processes. So as we came together as that system, everybody had different monitoring systems, even different equipment, different communication equipment, different parameters for how they measured their patients, different mechanisms for placing their monitors. And that was probably one of the bigger challenges. How do we bring together into an offsite location? And as you can see, it's a beautiful offsite location. And to mitigate all of those different mechanisms of communication, patient safety is my passion. That is what drew me to this particular specialty, and it had to be very, very well orchestrated. So we had to take I think the first step was standardizing. That's absolutely the first thing that we had to do was standardize not only the monitoring equipment, the parameters to be monitored, the mechanism for the communication, the digital documentation in the electronic medical record. All of those things had to be coordinated, had to be standardized, and really had to be streamlined. So thinking of the potential of my technicians, as you can see here, we're upwards of 40 miles away from a hospital. So we have to have immediate communication. We have to know who is the nurse for the patient at all times. We have to have an immediate mechanism to communicate these life-threatening rhythms to those caregivers. And so we have a lot of integrations here that some of the sites that I know of may not have integrated fully. So we have integrated with a middleware platform for alarm management, and we have integrated with a communication system for the alarm delivery to the caregiver. So that, to me, is the only way, in my humble opinion, that I would feel comfortable being so far away from a site in order to deliver this message of these critical life rhythms or life-threatening rhythms to a caregiver, knowing that it's going to be the patient's going to be attended to immediately for these things. As we know, these are things that have to be done rapidly. The other thing is standardizing workflows for the placement. So from the order to the placement, to the monitoring, to the discontinuation, all of those pieces have to be streamlined. And we have a fairly large system here, and we've been able to standardize all of those things and effectively monitor our patients. One of the things to mention here, this is just a portion of the room that you can see here. We actually have, again, all 8 campuses, all medical surgical, and all progressive care, which is a step below ICU. We have 1,200 patients that are monitored in this room 24/7, 365. And we've been doing this in this location since we started to move in 2018. And we moved the rest of our sites in one by one as they transitioned to the new telemetry equipment, to the new communication device, and acclimated to having all of this new technology in one location. Some of the things that I've shared with Alan that have been the biggest challenges is staffing and communication, making sure that the communication is truly instantaneous because of the type of information that we need to communicate. So that is just a little bit about how we've moved from on-site telemetry, which was very disjointed at some of the sites. Some had telemetry technicians on a unit, some had telemetry in a centralized location closet, and some didn't have any technicians at all. And so that was, part of the challenge is bringing all of these things together offsite. And again, we've been doing it now here since 2018, and 1,200 patients monitored safely and effectively, and communication immediately to any one of our 8 campuses that we have. So I appreciate the time to be able to describe to you what we're doing in Southeast Michigan, and be happy to answer any questions when the time comes.
Thank you. Thank you, Monique. And following Dr. Sujoy's flow, I think that then, Dr. Sai, if that is correct, we reserve the questions for later.
Yes, unless there's a burning question or a comment anyone wants to offer, we can go ahead right now. But I can see the air traffic control type setting you have, and you really need to be available at all times. I mean, I just a very quick anecdote. I used to work in North Dakota in a tiny clinic a long time ago, and I used to do treadmills. I'm a lung and critical care doctor now, but at one point I was supervising treadmills, and this guy was walking on the treadmill, and I'm looking at the monitor, and all of a sudden he's a wee fib, but he's still standing and walking. I had 4 seconds before he collapsed. So I can imagine the response time required that you need to do, and it's amazing, Monique, that what you mentioned. We'll circle back to Monique's a very interesting idea and what she's running. Alan, go ahead and let's have our next speaker.
Yes. And of course, Monique, coming from the medical device visualization space for me, and then medical devices, We're used to the term real time, which is real time, near real time, which is within 5 seconds. And when you said instant communication, do I assume 30 seconds, 45 seconds? What is instant communication?
That's a great question. And I'm very familiar with what you're talking about with near real-time waveforms. In the case of communicating the actual alarm, when I press the button to send an alert to a nurse, it is, I would say, within 2 to 3 seconds at any one of those campuses, their phone is alerting them to that condition with very specific alarm tones that we chose. We chose to mimic the alarm tones from our monitoring system so that they knew where it was coming from, so that it couldn't get confused with a text, a broadcast, a nurse call alert. It's very specific to our alarm system. The other thing that we're adding in is some voice information. So a voice will actually come and say, along with the tones of the alarming monitoring system, life-threatening rhythm. So we're telling you what it is that your phone is trying to tell you so that you can look at it instantly. And when you press, there's an accept button, I get instant feedback. And it really is instant. We've tested it real time. We've looked at it. When they press that button, I get notification. This is the handoff. And that is 100% what we have to have every time.
Thank you, Monique. And I'm sorry I didn't wait for the question for later, but now I will introduce also my good friend, Dr. Neil Patel. I met him recently. He was very kind to give me 1 hour to meet with him at Vanderbilt. We had an incredible whiteboard session that led to a 3-hour meeting and then a 3-hour dinner. So my first meeting with Dr. Patel was to talk about these issues, and it was specifically on how do we move the patient's traffic flow in a way that not all patients go to your unit, Monique. So Dr. Neil Patel, it is also an honor to pass this to you.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you so much for having me on this esteemed panel. The ideas that we're discussing are essential because the way we have been delivering healthcare for the past 100 years and with technology for the past 30 needs to be augmented. It's not that they need to be thrown away. Our problem is that the system is changing and the requirements that we need to deliver to our patients is changing. Much as was talked about earlier, that you have to deal with patients in the rural space as well as suburbia, as well as metro centers, as there are vulnerable patients throughout. And we need to deliver the same consistent level of care to them. I would argue that within the hospital setting, we also have disparities in terms of the level of care that patients receive, not because of the naivete of the staff, but I believe because of the rigid systems that bricks and mortars have put in place. We have fixed location where monitoring is available, such as the ICUs, such as the OR, such as step-down units, or as was stated just a little bit ago, where you have telemetry monitors available and they can be networked. At our hospital in Nashville, Tennessee, we are overrun with volume. We oftentimes in the emergency room have 60 to 70 patients waiting for beds upstairs, which results in increased number of patients waiting in the waiting room that should be in a bed, that should be in a monitor, but unfortunately cannot be because of the fixed locations. We now have designated beds lining the hallways that actually have physical bed space numbers, because when patients come in and are too sick to be in the waiting room, but don't have an actual ER room to go into, we have to put them on a gurney in a hallway, and nurses try to get to them. There's not a plug nearby, or sometimes there's not a network jack nearby. So what do we do and make sure that these patients are monitored and receive the level of care that is necessary? The biggest issue that we deal with is staffing. We've spoken about that, and there's different ways to deal with that. But one of the biggest problems that we have in the United States is there will not be enough clinical staff in the next 10 years to deal with the acuity of patients that we have. Nursing staff, respiratory care staff, laboratory technicians, telemetry technicians. And those staff that we do have, how do we bring the joy back to delivering care that they went into the profession for? And I believe that the part of the way that we get there is by using technology to re-empower them. Part of why burnout is occurring is because people feel that they're delivering less than optimal care, that they're scraping by and hoping not to have somebody fall through the cracks. And part of that is because they don't have the confidence that they have a finger on the pulse of the patient. And so with technology now, we have wearable technology that can provide not only telemetry data, but pulse oximetry, plus blood pressure. And you can do that in a way that can be adapted within the hospital setting. What we're attempting to do in our emergency room is to use a wearable portable monitor. Now, we know, and it was shown as examples of that, some have been around for a long time, but put it in a way that it is integrated into the fabric of the ecosystem of an emergency room and the hospital so that the data is not just local. It is liberated and aggregated in ways that it can either be in a central environment, such as Monique just presented, but more importantly, in addition to that, it can be at the fingertips of the nurse or the physician who is caring for multiple patients in the emergency room. So they feel like at a moment's notice, they can tap on their handheld and instantly get a view of the physiologic stability of an individual patient, because it's more than just the rhythm disturbance. It can be a deterioration with a rising heart rate. It can be a change in respiratory pattern. It can be a lot of these other things, because physiologic assessment requires that multimodal approach. In addition to having ready access, we cannot wait at times for an alarm to go off. You want to have that reassessment cycle so that you notice a trend long before you reach a critical level when an alarm might go off. So what we're going to be attempting to do is to use a wearable technology and have that integrated into our EHR fabric of information data flow, so that not only is it available to the provider as well as central monitors, depending on what the case may be, but also have that data flow into our EHR so that the charting and documentation requirements are also relieved of the bedside nurse. Because what happens when you have a patient in a non-traditional location, like a hallway bed, is everything turns manual. Not only the monitoring, but also the documentation. Because you don't have the data flow, you have to now hand transcribe, write the vital signs onto a piece of paper, and eventually when you get back to a computer, enter them. All that results in the data that was supposed to run through AI and through predictive algorithms, there is a latency. Just because the data is not in the place it needs to be for all of the important advances that we've had in algorithms and AI to take hold. So our belief is that the data should readily flow. It should be liberated from the device that is acquiring them, be instantaneously available not only for the human to view when they need to view it, but also readily available for the algorithms to have without a delay or be dependent upon a human to enter the data into a computer system. And in that way, we can create an increased safety net that will empower the individual caring for the patient, not only at the bedside, but also then leverage the incredible work that's being done in terms of central monitoring units, as well as remote care abilities to augment the care at the bedside. And so our hope is that within the next month, we'll have our first few beds to leverage this sort of data and hopefully transform that care. With those variables, those patients then may not need true telemetry monitoring. They may just need pulse oximetry, which can give you a heart rate. They may just need a simple 2-lead that can be continually monitored in a different level, and we don't have to make the bricks and mortar investments into the more expensive models, and reserve those for the truly critical patients that require them. And provide a cascading, acuity adaptable approach to monitoring as we move forward. And it can follow the patient where they go, whether they're in the bed in the hallway, whether they're being transported to the CT scanner because they're finally up for their study to be gotten, or when they're transported up to a medical surgical unit, that monitoring can still be there instead of having to wait for a precise bed for the care providers to feel like they're putting the patient in a safe environment. Our goal is to make every bed space, traditional and non-traditional, a safe environment. Thank you, Alan, for the opportunity that
thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great topics. And of course, I have myself a lot of questions, but I will save them this time. Dr. Sai, is that okay to move on with Dr. Sai?
You're saving your questions. I'm not. So I have one. So Neil, I mean, because there's just going to be so many questions. So Neil, really quick. So this is actually a question Dr. Dimitris and Dr. Neil both. So how do you set alarm thresholds? And the reason I ask you this is Apollo Hospitals embarked on something called enhanced monitoring. We have done about 20,000 patients in the last 6 months. Kind of like what Monique does, but we are using portable patches and non-contact devices, and about 70,000 patient days in the last 6 months of monitoring. And we have come up with looking at heart rates, respiratory rates, et cetera, and pulse ox, as well as blood pressure and the rhythms. Picked up a lot of alerts, lowered the number of code blues, made the rapid response time much faster, and actually enhanced the monitoring of patients who typically would not have any monitoring at all. They would not be in a traditional telemetry setting, but they're like an ER patient who, we don't know where they're going to go. So that kind of a monitoring has been done. So I'm going to ask Dr. Dimitris' opinion and Neil's opinion. Where do you set the thresholds? We had an issue with respiratory rates. They were sometimes accurate, sometimes not. Most of the time they were accurate. But then how do you predict what's going to happen? And maybe Monique, you want to fill in too. And Lynn, don't feel left out. We're going to ask you a lot more. Please feel free to jump in. So both of you and all of you, anything you can comment on, and then we move on to Lynn's wonderful next topic.
I can say a few words, if I may. From experience, I don't know if you remember in my answer to Sujoy, I indicated a curve that had the trade-off between precision and recall. The precision means, given that somebody is green, what is the probability of discharge? Given that the recall means, given that somebody is discharged, what's the probability of being green? And by moving the selection of where you operate, you have a trade-off between, as you increase towards the right, you make the probability of discharge given that the person is green, namely how accurate you are, higher. But on the other hand, you increase the probability of false alarms. So there's a trade-off between false alarm and accuracy, if you like. In my experience, the only way to do this correctly is to have physicians in the room where you discuss and the trade-offs. And it's not a universal selection. It depends on the application. It depends on the specific characteristics. But from experience, of which I have sizable in the last couple of years, I have found that involving appropriate physicians that have an understanding of the situation critical in deciding this.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm a pediatric cardiac ICU physician, so congenital heart disease. And what that implies is that what's a saturation rate that everybody in the world would consider normal is abnormal for my kids. And so it has to be personalized to the patient because a lot of other factors have to be taken into account. But we also have to compensate for the inexperience at the bedside at times. And so it has to be an and conversation. So I do believe that we cannot set arbitrary thresholds for patients. But what Dr. Dimitris has said is we have to create the opportunity for the decision to be made and not just assume somebody else has the ball. And I think that's where the workflow and integration into the workflow has to happen. All too often, the alarm limits on the monitors are just set. They're standard for the unit. And everybody thinks that the safety net's going to work because people don't want to take that load onto themselves. I think in the process of workflow, in the process of leveraging our order sets and such in a way that you create decision points and for the team to come together virtually or in real time to set the thresholds for patients. In my ICU, if my team waited for an alarm to go off, that means I failed, because I should have been there sooner. We should have been doing the reassessments to notice a trend long before the patient has reached a stage where somebody had to push the red button and everybody had to come running. And that is the direction that we have to move in. Leveraging AI to then create a point that says not that we're predicting a bad outcome, but that we've reached a threshold in which a reassessment has to be done is a more important point. And the way we can do that is to leverage the real-time data to then prompt the right reassessment to be done in a timely manner. With our critical alerts system at our hospital, you obviously always have the crisis values, but we also create a concept called clinically significant. This value has reached a point where somebody needs to pay attention, not just go save the patient.
Thank you, Neil. Alan, one more point, I promise I'll shout out. I'm sure, I was giving a talk on alarms, and I went and took a picture of the ICU monitor. The silence button was all worn out. There was one button that was all broken up because we keep hitting silence. And your point about giving a personalized attention to it's absolutely true. And Neil, your passion and compassion, talk about the joy of care coming back. That's truly what we're trying to do, right? Let's not forget, technology is great, but we're trying to help patients and make sure that they have a safe journey through the ecosystem. And how can we make it better? And that's kind of what we're talking about, using a lot of technical terms. Lynn, all yours. And Alan, please introduce Lynn. Thank you.
Yes, and I'm already seeing the topic of the next conference, hopefully soon, because I think we have to make a special one. I think that AI was defined as augmented intelligence, and I think the next topic is, the next conference is going to be augmented human intelligence, because we forgot about the people. The staffing shortage is still there, and we need to figure that out, and I think we have plenty ideas. But now, Lynn, I saved you for last because you are the one that glues it all together, looking at enterprise population management, health management. So it is an honor to introduce you, Lynn.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, it's a privilege to be here today. Thank you, Alan and Dr. Sai and others for letting me contribute to the conversation. And I am in Franklin, Tennessee, just about 20 miles south of Dr. Patel. So I look forward to more collaboration there as well. Just a little background on community health systems. We are community hospitals in the United States. We like to think of ourselves about in 43 different markets in 15 states. And we have about 76 hospitals and over 1,000 sites of care. Along with that, we have about 800 primary care physicians. And so the effort that talking about today with remote patient monitoring is really trying to put some tools in the hands of our primary care physicians so they can better care for their patients with some chronic diseases, specifically hypertension, diabetes, and congestive heart failure. So what we did is partner with another company to help us with the devices. We use cellular-enabled devices that are the patients are oriented to use at home. Their blood pressure cuffs, scales, glucometers, those types of things. Sort of not terribly sophisticated devices, but things that the patients can work themselves. We started last year deploying this, again, through our primary care physicians who decide what patients need to have monitoring at home by specific criteria. And also they've developed the protocols by which these patients are being monitored and can be managed by nurse practitioners or nurses that interact with the patients on a daily basis. So to date, we've enrolled about 7,000 patients. We're currently actively monitoring 5,700 patients and seeing some good results. We have good patient engagement. About 75% of the patients that we have enrolled interact with their devices or have at least 16 measurements per month. That tends to be important because of the reimbursement structure in the United States for that. But the patients generally engage with the device, engage with the nurses that they interact with and get the results. The results also are completely integrated with the electronic medical record, so at any time the physicians can see those results. One of the things that we wanted to accomplish, not only improve patient outcomes, was we didn't want to bury our practitioners in data. So as Dr. Patel said, we wanted to bring back some of the joy of medicine and take the burden off of the physician. And what we're seeing is, because of the protocols and because of the nurses that are engaging with the patients, for every 100 patients that a physician has enrolled, only 5 messages get back to the doc per month. So there's really not a heavy burden on the physician, but we are seeing improvement. As I said, the patients are very engaged. Our Net Promoter Score is 62, which in healthcare is not too bad. We're not Amazon yet, but getting better. And that again, the clinician workload is not overburdened. And I've even had physicians say that it just seems like magic. They put the patient on the monitoring, and the patient comes back in several weeks, and their blood pressure is controlled. So what we're seeing is an average of a reduction of 25 points in systolic blood pressure in the first 16 weeks that the patient is enrolled, and then similar improvements with diabetes and compliance with medication management with congestive heart failure. So our goal is really to get 10,000 patients actively enrolled by the end of the year. And then I think our next steps will be using automation and using AI to make us much more efficient. And I think we can really scale this greatly. At this point, we have not rolled it out to all our clinicians yet. So I think the 10,000 mark at the end of the year is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. What we're seeing now is just by, I guess, word of mouth between our clinicians about how the program's working, the patients like it, the doctors are not overburdened. We're seeing reduced returns to the emergency department. We're seeing overall they've had some pretty good initial studies on lower cost of care that by the time we'll get from one market to the next, the docs already have hundreds of patients lined up to get on the system. So we're driving good engagement both from the clinicians and the patients and having good outcomes. So I go ahead and stop there and see if there are additional questions.
Perfect. And of course, as you all know, I have probably 30 years on the technology side, and I keep talking about the human element here because I notice in all my customers throughout the different engagements I had that the staffing shortages is a huge crisis. And it's not just the shortage, but as Dr. Patel mentioned, is the inexperience in certain areas of the hospital. And I know you were referring a lot about the general ward. Unfortunately, now it's becoming in other areas of the hospital. But you also talked, Dr. Patel, about that workflow in the hallways, the borders. And you talked about notifying the clinician, but I have been there in those tours, and I asked the ER nurses, if I give you the notifications, where would you like them? And they will say, nowhere. They are not my patients anymore. I just admitted them to the hospital. And I walked all over the hospital looking for somebody that was willing to take those notifications other than the telemetry unit. But Monique, you have built an incredible infrastructure that expands beyond telemetry and into the general wards. But if I tell you that out of your 8 hospitals, I'm going to bring 40 patients per hospital on the boarding area, you don't have the bandwidth or even the infrastructure to monitor those. So the human intelligence piece is the one that is missing. And Lynn, as we move into the home or at home, because we are talking a lot about hospital to home, but if we move into hospital at home, which is an admission, imagine if they are in the hallway and nobody's watching them. And now we put a patient at home as a hospital admission. This is going to be a huge crisis. So how do you all see the issue of the human element on care?
Yeah, I'll start off and then defer to some of my colleagues. I think that Dr. Patel had hit the nail on the head. I think with our becoming more having our systems become more intelligent and moving the knowledge upstream about what a patient's condition is doing is probably the only answer. So we're working on that too. We have a team of internal data scientists with machine learning and AI with the express goal of trying to figure out how we get better signals to both, the nursing team and the physicians, so they know the condition of their patient and know that if there looks to be signals that a patient is, their care or their outcomes are moving in the wrong direction, that they get not the warning that like you said, the alarm goes off and we have to have a code. I think it's just so there is a barometer, so to speak, on every patient about are they improving? Are they going in the direction that we intended for them? And if not, what are those subset of patients and how do we attend to them very far upstream before it gets to the point where there's an alarm alert? I think the problem of, alarms have been around for a long time and no one's ever solved them because we need to actually eliminate those types of alarms and move upstream to provide better signals of care.
Anybody else on that?
This one thing that I would like to say about that is, from our perspective, we are acutely aware of the nursing shortage across all of our hospitals. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on is providing a service not only to the patient, but truly to the nurse. So in many of our patient units, the nurses are not trained to interpret the ECG rhythm. And that's really the gap that my staff bridges to them. So we're really surveilling the patients consistently. And, to the point that Dr. Patel made, being able to create the workflow and the empowerment for my staff to recognize a change, to hand that off to the nurse. And then we truly do encourage them to reach out to a physician for that specific parameter that makes more sense for the patient. We had to start somewhere with parameters, and we looked at studies. We looked at, other hospitals who chose certain values for a parameter violation. There's really nothing for an arrhythmia violation, but there is for those parameters. So you're taking that information and then you're really asking for it to be specified for the patient. The only person who can do that effectively is the physician. So we're really, bridging the gap and creating the empowerment and workflows between our staff and the nurse and the physician to make it right for the patient.
And thank you. Dr. Patel, you talked earlier about the aspect of personalized medicine. And I think this is where the AI teams need to come in and start helping us to take us to that road by descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and then prescriptive analytics. Prescriptive being where we start developing the clinical pathways, the clinical protocols, and personalizing medicine. So, Dr. Sai, how are we doing on time?
We are doing on time. Time marches on. Waits 101. We got 11 minutes, but we can probably go a little longer. There are plenty of questions. I'm going to just pick one, and then I'm going to invite Ms. Sangeeta Reddy, our Joint Managing Director, to kind of share her insights. The one question I'm picking from the multiple that have come through in the chat network is, how are you going to work out the cost for all this? How are you going to make sure that the cost for doing this is manageable, acceptable, and what are the models we need to look at for 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line to make sure this is sustainable? I'd invite all the speakers to pitch in on that one.
So I can start. Part of the way we're approaching and the reason we're using some of the wearable technology is it comes at a much cheaper price tag and usability than the traditional high-end monitors. So this is a mechanism, just like in our daily lives, all of a sudden price of technology is much more accessible for everybody, and we can leverage it in the right way. And so we know that there's not many healthcare dollars to go around. So what we have to do is, where are we significantly spending them now? Labor is still the number one cost of healthcare. The number two cost of healthcare is at times too much care or overutilization. That's, in my opinion, where the dollars can come from if we do this smartly. If we just approach this of a steal from one area so that it hurts another area and helps your own, that's the type of game that too many health systems have played within their health system and against health systems. But it's not sustainable. I think we need to collaborate in ways to lift up the community and to have the right dose of technology. And hopefully we do it in a way that overall decreases the expenditure enough to pay for what we need to do.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, the cost shifting is not the answer, but figuring out optimization. Lynn or Monique?
I think the word overutilization speaks to me that Dr. Patel just said. We had a recent scenario where we did have a connectivity issue in one of our sites. And the first thing that we do, because we're offsite, we try to have as much redundancy as possible. But when that did occur, the call out went to the physicians to truly evaluate your patients. And I will tell you that 40% of all patients monitored in those med-surg areas were discontinued. So I think that's a great opportunity for reduction, is truly evaluating the need and thinking of it from that perspective, from the front end rather than the back end, because we have all kinds of back end discontinuation processes that that we can look at, but what about really from the front end? So I appreciate that comment.
Thank you, Monique.
And we have some questions, Dr. Bain.
Oh, just to add a comment, that's a very complicated thing. The reality is, in all of our systems, that only if these things are cost effective will they find a place. It doesn't matter what other benefits they provide, unfortunately. There's a complexity in our system, in the public system, where our hospitals are actually funded at this stage for a volume of work. And if they don't deliver that volume of work, they only get sort of 98% of the promised funding. If they deliver more than 101 or 102% of that volume of work, they don't get any more income and they bear the cost. So it's a very complicated scenario that's system dependent. And the other variable here is, we all know labour is the biggest shortage and sort of bottleneck in healthcare and the cost attached to it. But if we start talking about replacing clinicians, that also then culturally won't fly. So it's a very difficult, long journey for us on that front.
Thank you. So I'm going to now jump in and invite Ms. Sangeeta Reddy to kind of add a few words of inspiration, and we'll move on to a little more questions if you have time. Sangeeta, all yours, please.
So good morning, good evening. I must first begin by saying how amazing it is to be amongst you. I see thought leaders, I see evangelists of healthcare, I see so much passion. And Dr. Patel, your comment on bringing the joy back to healthcare, could not have rung more true. And at the same time, I see the vision of all of you, that you want to reach out and touch more lives, you want to innovate, you want to use new technologies. So I just want to begin by saying that I'm not just impressed, but further inspired. It has always been Apollo's mission to find ways to reach out and deliver healthcare. And in this combination of quality, because all of us want the best care, the cost of care, and the accessibility of care, whether you're going into rural India or you're going into rural America, it's not, we can't compromise either one of these pillars. and it is for us to be able to adopt technology and innovation to find methods. And it takes me back to the thought process of, one of the most famous leaders who actually said that if you dream of, enabling every child in India to eat ice cream, then you will find a way to sell an ice cream for 2 rupees and not 30 rupees like Baskin Robbins costs. And to do that, you will re-engineer the cold chain. You will change the way you deliver. You will remanufacture, and you will then figure out how you create that accessibility. So I think all of us are passionate about this. I believe that technology is going to play a major role. And the combination of technology and, such great leaders and so much thought, Dr. Bertimus, Dr. Bain, all the learnings of using the appropriate AI at the right time, and you're bringing the pure science into medicine was amazing. And then, Monique, Dr. Patel, and Lynn, each one of you in your innovative models, and whether it's high-end care or, the telemetry wards, or it is, primary healthcare, every area needs this intervention. So I really can't, add much from a technical perspective to what all of you have said. But I just want to add one thought at a very, overview perspective. And that is that, some of us who are early adopters, and I think all of you are in that, we somehow kind of overestimate the impact that we are going to have in the short term. And we think, this is just amazing. It's right there. Why don't people see it? Why don't they adopt it tomorrow? And that, it gives us a certain sense of reticence, or, we wonder why it's not happening the way it should be, because it's just so obviously good for the world. And then as we overestimate that, we underestimate the impact of the change that's going to happen in the next 5 years or the next decade. So I would just kind of say that let us stay the course. I truly believe we're on the right path. And let's stay the course and, try and make sure that the 5 years or 10 years comes down to 2 or 3. And I believe that all of you with your intellectual prowess and everything you've spoken about truly have the ability to do so. I will just, pitch in to say that on behalf of Apollo, whether it's data consortiums, whether it's pilot projects, whether it's sharing of knowledge, and finally coming out and standing up, a company that can bring low-cost, high-quality care from a remote monitoring perspective, any of these, which you all believe is, things that we should do in the future, I will make sure that our boards back them, because it goes hand in hand with our vision, or our chairman's vision of, reaching out and touching as many lives as we can, helping transform healthcare and bring equitable care across the world. And from the aspect of the care delivery and the burden of care, I've been on G20, leadership in India, and I was in the G20 Health Summit as well. I think if we're feeling overburdened right now, if we take the statistics of what is going to happen, our hospitals are already full, yet the rate of the aging population, the complexity because of lifestyle disease, the tsunami really of non-communicable disease, all these are going to further accelerate our problem. And therefore, it is very clear that our current systems are unsustainable. We need to, like I said earlier, stay the course in terms of the innovation and the passion to make something, what is possibly unbelievable happen. And just to reiterate this faith, now, nobody could have believed that we could convince the government of India to do the kind of things. Dr. Ganapathy projected what a large team of people going into rural India and doing proactive preventive cancer screening, because we said, don't solely focus on creating radiation therapy units when they're in stage 3 and stage 4. Please catch them in stage 1. It is scientific, data-based, technology-enabled, but really enlightened new ways of doing healthcare, which is going to help us in the future, be able to serve the kind of population that's required. So I just want to sign off. I think it's very important that people who have been with you have a chance to answer questions, but I will say thank you to every single one of you for your time, for your knowledge. I will say I look forward to meeting with you personally at some point and furthering our collaborations. And I commit on behalf of our organization, our continued commitment to education, to sharing knowledge, to bringing great people like you together so that we can really help to heal the world. So thank you so much. And one quick word for all our passionate organizers, Sai, Sujoy, Ashok, and all of you, thank you. Alan, thanks for the great work you do and for retaining this. I know that very often it's more than your day job because you just have this great passion. So thank you, guys. It's quite incredible. And truly, once again, look forward to meeting with all of you and making this reality come true for the sake of our patients and for the sake of our healthcare teams. All the very best and namaste.
Thank you again, Sangeeta. Again, one more speaker. It's very hard to go after, but I am going to try because, we totally forgot the topic. It was global perspectives on enhanced care to improve health equity. And that's pretty much what we covered. I didn't even state the topic in the beginning, but that's exactly what we've been trying to do. There are tons of questions. Ashish, our coordinator with the H&G and APHS, I'm going to request you to try to track down the people who had questions and actually get back long, meaningful answers back to them, not just one words that we would be giving. So we'll collate to the speakers out there on YouTube and LinkedIn. My apologies, the lack of time. We will not be touching all questions, but I'm going to request all speakers to give us one word or sentence that you took away from today that might change what you do for the future, and maybe advice to people who are entering the space of AI, healthcare, telemetry, etc. Where do you think they should go next? Just a 1 minute, 30-second thing, and then we'll kind of close, and then we'll touch base again. Professor Bertsimus, would you like to go first? And I'm going to request Professor Ganapathy, and then have Professor Bain, who's thankfully still here with us, and we'll go around the table there. Thank you. Professor Bertsimus, please.
I don't know about only today, but through the trajectory of my life and career, I have not found a better time than this, where AI, in my opinion, can really transform medicine, and its outcomes. It is in all over the world. It really, AI can democratize healthcare around the world, and it requires the combination of expertise of experts in fields like computer science, applied mathematics, and medicine, and also very significant also is the role of leaders who see this opportunity and move in this direction. I cannot be more excited about this area, and I try to translate this to my students, of whom I believe the future belongs to them.
Thank you. Professor Ganapathy?
Thank you, Dr. Hadnath. The one word which impressed me the most was for Dr. Allen's statement, the human element. I honestly feel we are all evangelists, otherwise we wouldn't be here. We obviously believe in not only in AI, but in remote healthcare. Are we trying to convert the converted, or should we spend more time in trying to get that huge band of disbelievers into this area? The only way which we can do it, and I'm talking about clinicians between the age of 40 and 60 who cannot be ignored. We need to convince them with solid clinical data, answer the question, so what? Okay, you took 350 blood pressure measurements over 6 hours. So what? Do you have a double-blind randomized control study, which may not be possible, but give me some evidence that this additional voluminous information which you are now bombarding me with has made a difference in the healthcare outcome of my patient. Prove it to me. And believe me, there'll be hundreds of thousands of doctors wanting to jump on the AI bandwagon. Most of these articles are published in Nature and other esoteric journals. Please have these articles published in simple day-to-day, which the healthcare provider reads. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil, or Professor Bain, you'll go next, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sai. I really liked Sangeeta Reddy's comment about, because I've heard this before and it's good to be reminded of it. We overestimate our immediate impact and underestimate our longer term impact. Very relevant, very important. A little bit of a follow on from Dr. Ganapathy. I think we need to keep providing evidence for all sorts of audiences, especially clinicians, and we need to keep explaining, and no better example than Dimitris' work where he's explaining why predictions are the way they are, because people will buy into that.
Thank you. Neil?
I would just say that as we develop all of these incredible opportunities, implementing them and integrating them into clinical workflow. Because if they're off to the side, no matter how good they are, people are too overwhelmed to incorporate them by themselves.
Lynn, please.
Yeah. I think there has to be a driving force for change. As we saw with COVID, we were able to change very quickly because we had to. Now we're in a crisis of workforce, and that's just enough, I think, of a crisis. It's not going to go away, right? Like COVID sort of hasn't gone away, but for the most part, the crisis has. But it's going to push us to do things differently, and I think sometimes we need that inspiration, so to speak, to do things differently. And I think the other exciting part is that it's coming together at a time where we have the tools to do that with devices and AI. So I'm pretty optimistic about the future because of those things.
Great. And Monique?
I think with all of this amazing innovation, technology, all of these things, we can never forget that there's a patient attached to all of that. I think that has to be, really at the base of everything that we're developing. Never forget that patient.
Thank you. Alan, you want a last word there?
Yes. So I'm inspired by all of you. The question that you asked was, what do we do from today moving forward? I think that Apollo and the universe brought us together today because we have the same vision and the same mission. We talked about the technology, but we also talk about the human element, which is not just the physicians, but it is the patients. And I think we have a call to action for all of us in this group to work together, and also invite anybody in the audience to come and work with us, because together we will transform healthcare.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I think we have had an extremely enriching last 2 hours. The time went by really fast. I really appreciate and thank everybody who worked very hard to put this together. In the background, the IT team, Ashish, Vikram, rest of the crew, thank you so much for helping us do this. Thanks to technology that we can actually connect seamlessly this way. Quick update that the THIT, which is actually a physical conference, is going to be in the city of Bangalore in the month of February. So you're all invited to that. The specific dates and the agendas are all being put together, and a significant theme is going to be, how do we take things forward? Our hope is that between now and February, we have more frequent conversations, and we'll keep you posted on how we're going to do that. In a couple of weeks, or actually 10 days, we're going to be presenting something very interesting at the International Hospital Federation's World Hospital Congress on our 5G ambulance, for example. This is something we've done practically, where we're actually using 5G technology to monitor patients from home to the hospital. So there are things which are going on in many places around the world which are worth discussing. And we believe truly that, as Monique said, the patient's at the center of this. Let's keep it practical. Let's keep it cost effective. And as Neil said, let's try to pull together resources which are not wasted. And Lynn works in the community, and she knows the challenges people face. And it's not hard to see that a little bit of shifting of ideas and models might really solve what we can do. And I completely believe that we are all in this as a mission. I mean, healthcare is a mission. It's a passion for most of us, and it's a service we're doing for humanity. And I think pulling our resources together will make a great difference. Thank you all again for joining in, and again, appreciate the THIT team for putting this together, and have a wonderful evening. Hopefully it's breakfast time for all of you. Enjoy your muffins or pancakes, and maybe a midnight coffee for Professor Bain. We're all here in India. It's dinner time here. And thank you to the wonderful audience. My apologies for not getting all your questions, but I promise that Ashish and the team will get back to you on exactly all these very specific details, and we'll keep you all posted on what's coming next. Have a wonderful evening again. Good night.
Thank you very much.